Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm your host, Amy Dash. You were just listening to testimony from some employees who worked at the hospital where Tex McIver brought his wife, Diane, after he shot her. I want to welcome in some guests. We have two attorneys joining us right now during this lunch break. Mark Eiglarsh, an attorney out of Florida, who we've had on many times before, and Philip Holloway, a criminal defense attorney based out of Atlanta, who actually knows many of the players in this trial. Thank you both for joining me. I want to start with you, Philip. Did you know Tex McIver personally?
No, I have never met him. His type of law that he practices is really not anything that would ever intersect with a criminal defense lawyer's practice unless it was just by happenstance. But I have heard of him, but I don't know him personally. We do have some mutual friends, but I don't know him personally.
So what's the rumor mill generating around the city? Do people think that he's a killer?
You know, the people are kind of divided on it because this whole motive idea that the prosecution is pushing, that it's all about the money, is not necessarily ringing true with people. And then you've got the issue of whether or not he took him to the right hospital. There's, arguably reasonable explanations for Tex taking his wife directly to Emory University Hospital rather than some hospitals that might have been a better choice in hindsight. So there's reasonable explanations as to both of those things, which have been a big part of the prosecutor's case. But the thing that's got people thinking that he might be guilty is the fact that Tex is apparently a gun aficionado, and anybody who's trained in firearms knows that you don't really keep one in the backseat in your hand with your finger on the trigger. That's just basic gun safety 101. And people who are trained with firearms, that causes them great pause as to whether or not this could truly be an accident, because triggers do not simply pull themselves.
Yeah, and there's dispute over whether the gun was cocked. Experts weren't able to tell. Mark, it was handed to him in a plastic bag, that gun, by his wife. That's not disputed. And apparently he fired it through the bag. The fact that she handed this to him, and when it was accidentally fired, as he says, it was in a plastic bag. What do you make of that, and why is that relevant to the determination of whether it was intentional?
I don't know. That is bizarre, isn't it? Right? A plastic bag? It doesn't do anything for me.
Well, there was some speculation that maybe he did that on purpose so that his fingerprints wouldn't be on the gun, but he doesn't dispute that he was the one who fired it.
Right. That's why I think it's a nothing burger. What isn't, though, and I want to ask Philip about this, when you were asking about how people feel about this case, somehow people, he claims, are not buying the financial motive. And for me, from what I'm hearing, that gets me to think that it's more likely that this was intentional. He allegedly went from a minus $5,000 in his account to immediately after the death, $1.1 million, and now inherits $7 million from her estate. Why do people not think that's a motive for murder?
Philip, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, the reason that the defense, I'm sure, will give is that because Tex's lifestyle was much better off with Diane alive. I mean, she was the one literally carrying him financially, apparently. And, with her alive and their marriage being intact, then he's going to be able to maintain his standard of living. He's 6 years old. You could argue that obviously that his net worth, if you will, went up based on her death. But you could also say that he would have been much better off if he'd have just lived out the rest of his life with her, and he would have still been able to maintain that same lifestyle. And after all, he was making $350,000 a year, that we heard yesterday. And by most people's standards, that's a hell of a lot of money, and most people can certainly make ends meet on that.
Philip, I would agree with you. $350,000 is a lot of money unless you're spending $355,000 a year. And again, I don't know what his finances are, but his wife apparently was very tight with the money, very controlling. Again, just so we're clear, I don't know what the facts are. This is just what I'm reading and what's being alleged. If it's true, I think coming into $7 million and not having a wife to spend any of that money, who you apparently, allegedly don't want around, is probably a good motive for murder. But again,
They certainly had a peculiar financial situation. It's not that unusual for couples to keep their accounts separate, but then on the other hand, there was this accounting of a loan that she had made to her husband where she charged him interest on the loan, just to show her personality. I mean, she was depicted by some people who worked with her as a very sharp-tongued and ambitious, stern, serious businesswoman. But on the other hand, we also heard that they split the finances in terms of when they would go on vacations. They would split the cost. When they would throw birthday parties for their godson, they would split the cost. And on the other hand, nobody really says anything bad about their marriage. Nobody ever witnessed them fighting or arguing. In fact, quite the opposite. They were depicted as having a good marriage.
Amy, wait,
Yeah,
I got to.
even Diane, in her own words, to the doctor, said that, this was an accident. Now, you could argue, well, how would she know it was an accident or not if she wasn't facing rearward? Of course, I think that's what the prosecution would argue in response to that. But the marital financial arrangement struck me as extremely bizarre. She's charging him 5% interest on a $350,000 loan, and the payments are interest only. So she's apparently making money, if you will, earning a profit from the interest payments from her husband. I don't think there's anybody that would dispute that if Tex was charged with being ridiculously stupid in the way that he handles his financial affairs, he would be guilty, no question about it. This was a very bizarre arrangement, and I really don't know what to make of it. And that right there tells me that if there's at least one person in the jury that doesn't know what to make of all this, that is reasonable doubt and could lead to a not guilty verdict.
Also a bit relevant is the fact that Diane's executive assistant said that when he finally sat down after her death to go over the finances with her husband, he was surprised to learn that she only had about $400,000 in her account. I want to shift gears for a second, though, because we've heard testimony all day today about how he rushed her to the hospital to get help and how he reacted when he got there. Let's listen to a short clip and then come back and discuss his actions and behaviors at the hospital.
And were you there this evening?
No.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. What you were just watching was Tex McIver pulling up to the hospital with his wife Diane after he shot her and calling for help. Apparently, according to testimony this morning from the valet person who was in that video, when he arrived, Tex McIver started shouting for the valet person to come and help him get his wife out of the car. She had been shot. And she was obviously suffering a large amount of blood loss, and they were trying to get her help right away. I want to welcome in two defense attorneys that we've been talking with this morning, Mark Eiglarsh out of Florida and Philip Holloway out of Atlanta. Mark, with the testimony this morning, the fact that Tex McIver even drove his wife to the hospital, does that undermine the prosecution's theory that this was an intentional murder?
I don't think that does it.
But then it's a deceptive plot, Mark, because then that's part of the plan to appear like he's trying to get her help.
Listen, the whole plan sucked if it really was a plan. So nothing is going to fit into box A, box B. His plan could be, I'm going to shoot my wife, and I'll figure that she probably won't make it, and I got to go to the hospital because it looks bad if I don't. And it worked. Or it was a tragic accidental shooting, and he's still going to try to get her to the hospital. This case should not hinge upon that and that particular action.
Philip, do you think that undermines the prosecution's attempts at trying to paint this as intentional? Because really, if he did want her dead, he's banking on the fact that if he gets her help, she may not survive. And how would he even know that?
He wouldn't even know that. And as it turns out, Emory University Hospital, which he's given so much hell for taking her to that hospital versus Grady, which is much closer and got a great trauma unit. Emory University Hospital was a hospital that he was personally familiar with because his law firm had represented them. He knew how to get there from where they were. Nobody in the car really knew for sure how to get to any other hospital that would have been a better choice in hindsight. And here's the thing, though. If he's going to shoot her in the back and wanting her to die, why not shoot her much further out of town on the way back from their dinner? They were well outside of Atlanta. Why not do it well before you get close to Atlanta? And if he'd have done it then, there would have been no way that they could have gotten her to a hospital. So that right there, to me, does undercut the state's case. I've never really given much credit to that argument because I'm personally familiar with that area. I know where 14th and Piedmont is, and if I were just awakening and maybe having had a little bit to drink, maybe not knowing exactly what's going on, and you say, where's the closest hospital? I'm probably going to go to the one that I know about, not one that I'm going to have to guess about. And the other thing is that who knows how long an ambulance would take to get there. So if they're already moving northbound on Piedmont, to my mind, taking her to Emory, if I am Tex McIver, makes good sense. Because if he doesn't know about and can't really for sure say how to get to something else, why guess about where to go? Go to the hospital that you're most familiar with.
Well, because you're saying basically he shot her within close proximity to a hospital when he in fact lives on an isolated ranch and very well could have done that. Mark, what about the fact that this happened when someone else was in the car? Her best friend was driving the car.
I agree with you. Listen, if you put it all together, I'm going to add to Philip's point, which resonated with me. Not only do you have someone in the car, which I'll address in a second, but I got to address who shoots someone in the back. You've got a choice of going a few inches up and going straight into the brain, the head area. I find that to be very unusual. But yes, also you're going to wait and shoot someone with their best friend. Now you got a witness you got to deal with. And sure enough, it did backfire because now you've got testimony that allegedly he tried to get her to change her testimony.
Yeah. So let's look really quick at more clips from that hospital surveillance footage where you can see Diane McIver in a wheelchair, slumped over as she's being rushed into the hospital to try to save her life.
Is he employed by
Public safety.
your body?
I could have in Republic City.
Do you know where they're going?
They went out to the Valley area.
There you're seeing Tex McIver and his wife. After she's been shot, they're rushing her into the hospital. You can see that she is slumped downward, almost lying flat in the wheelchair. And he was clearly assisting with getting her into the hospital.
Do you know who the guy in the white shirt is?
Not by name, but I know he's a ballet attendant also.
Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. You were just watching surveillance video from the hospital, and you saw Diane McIver being rushed in, wheeled in, and she was pretty much lying flat. Her husband was assisting as they were trying to get her emergency care after she had been shot in the back by her husband. I'd like to welcome back our guests, Mark Eiglarsh, an attorney out of Florida, and Philip Holloway, an attorney out of Atlanta, who knows some of the players involved in this trial. We heard actually from one of the emergency room nurses. And Philip, she said that Diane McIver was pretty unresponsive when she first came into the hospital, but after she got some fluids in her, she did come to, and she said a pretty heartbreaking statement. It was one of her last declarations. She said, "I'm dying, aren't I?" Something to that effect. Do you think at that opportunity, someone who was intentionally killed or thought that their husband had done something to try to kill them would have notified somebody?
You know, I think that in hindsight, you know, should they have called 911? Yes, but I don't think they necessarily should have stopped. And it was heartbreaking to hear that testimony and to see that video because she's obviously mortally wounded. She made several statements that one can interpret in any number of ways. She said that when she was asked, did she want to see her husband, and reportedly she said no. What she was thinking when she said no, we'll never know. But she also clearly said this was an accident, and apparently she was able to be aware that she was probably about to die. That's all very heartbreaking, but it doesn't really shed much light on the issue of guilt or innocence here. I think if the legal standard here were one of negligence versus proof beyond a reasonable doubt, I don't think there would be any question that Tex was at least negligent. Because like I said, you don't carry a weapon in your hand with your finger on the trigger unless you're intending to pull that trigger, at least not if you're practicing proper gun safety, as he was apparently known to do.
Yeah, and you can see the picture of them there on Happier Times.
On both sides, and I think that it's going to come down to whether or not there's one juror or maybe more that have just that little bit of reasonable doubt in the back of their mind.
Well, Philip, I'll disagree with you on one point, and Mark, I'd love to hear what you think. If a person has been shot and is dying and says something to the effect of she thinks it was an accident, I think that would bear upon innocence or guilt. Mark?
It helps. That's a fact that I like if I'm defending this guy, but it's someone that I can easily overcome. Believability and accuracy are two different things. She believed, based upon the very limited knowledge that she had at that moment under those circumstances, that it must have been an accident. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate, right? And here's the other thing. I wouldn't take on the burden of trying to prove as a defense lawyer that they had a wonderful relationship, right? You don't need to go that high. It could have just been an okay relationship. Anyone who's charging their significant other interest on a loan, I don't know, man. That's not, my wife wouldn't be doing that to me, okay? And that's why we have a wonderful relationship. Maybe 3% or 2%, but not 5%. That's outrageous.
Apparently, though, he paid it every month on time. Thank you guys so much. We're going to go to a quick break. Mark, you'll stay with me, but Philip, you have to go. So thank you so much for joining me. We will be back to discuss the Tex McIver trial here on the Law and Crime Network in just a few moments. And welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host, Amy Dash, and I'm joined by criminal defense attorney Mark Eiglarsh out of Florida. We're talking about the Tex McIver case. Mark, do you think that the people who testified this earlier today, these were people that worked at the hospital, a lot of them didn't give much insight into how Tex McIver was acting, but we did hear a little bit. Basically, they were saying that he was concerned, he was upset, the fact that he was crying during opening arguments of this trial, that he's displaying emotion and concern, and whatever those feelings may be directed toward, either the loss of his wife or what he had done that he might feel remorseful over, will it impact the jury?
Yes. I've told you before, I've told many people that trials aren't about seeking the truth. That's what people think or are told anyway. It's theater. From the defense perspective, they're not there to seek the truth. They're there to acquit their client. And I don't know if those are real tears or not, but I guarantee you, if my client can show tears, the client's going to do it. And if there are witnesses who are going to be called and said that he actually seemed like he was concerned genuinely and wanted her to live, those are going to be the highlights in my closing argument after that testimony comes forward.
Let's look right now at another clip from the hospital surveillance video as we can see everything unfold. It's quite unusual, actually, to have this type of footage.
We're looking at the video again from the beginning, correct?
Yes.
The car's not yet in view, correct?
Somewhat.
The Ford Expedition.
It's right at there.
There it is,
There
correct?
it is. Yes.
It has flashing lights, correct?
Well, the lights appear to be flashing.
The lights are flashing.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. McIver in the red shirt gets out before the car even stops, correct? And starts walking up towards the entrance, correct?
I see him.
And he's trying to open the door while the car is still moving, correct?
He's walking next to the vehicle, yes.
And he's walking to try to open the car door, correct? We lose sight of him because the front door is
Objection, Your Honor. Cause for speculation.
sustained. Do you see him walking up alongside the car as it's still moving,
Yes.
coming up to the emergency room entrance, correct?
I see him walking towards the vehicle, yes.
Right. He's not leisurely walking up to the ER while the car's parked,
He's
correct?
not rushing, but he's walking, yes.
Right. He's walking alongside the moving car.
Objection, Your Honor. Acting
Sustained. There's no sound in this, right? You can't hear what he's saying.
No.
Do you know where he is right now in the image?
No.
Wait a couple seconds. You have two of your employees.
Objection, Your Honor. Testifying.
I see him.
You see him now?
I see him.
Okay. He's helping get the patient down the front seat, correct?
He's right there, right by the driver's door or the door.
And now we have ER people coming out, nurses coming out.
Yes.
And they have a wheelchair,
Yes.
correct? And now the patient's being put in the wheelchair, correct?
She's in the wheelchair, yes.
And he's doing what he can to help get the wheelchair into the yellow pole called, and then into the ER, correct?
Yes.
tell me about this time difference problem?
I was not quite sure. I heard there was a time difference, but I wasn't for sure. But the cameras itself, when we install the cameras for exact vision, those are manually set when we install the cameras.
So we have one camera at the door looking out, one camera at the side looking at the cars coming in, correct?
Right.
And they're not even at the same time, correct?
I'm not sure.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host, Amy Dash. Diane McIver, the victim in this case, her financial circumstances are being painted as the motive that her husband wanted to get his hands on the money. They had always maintained separate finances, so far as we've heard, and she was a very successful businesswoman. But we have also heard from colleagues that she was pretty sharp-tongued, that she was very serious. Business meant business. Let's, though, hear a little bit about the softer side of Diane McIver, as well as details about her will. And we will come back and discuss that and its relevance to this alleged motive.
And at some point in time, did you become aware of the fact that Diane McIver was working on her will?
Yes.
Okay. And when did you become aware of the fact that Diane McIver was working on her will?
We were asked to do a codicil,
And who was we?
Mr. Rickard and myself,
Okay. And that request was made by whom?
by Diane McIver to Attorney Kendrick.
Okay. And at the time that this request was made to Mr. Rickard, did you know whether or not Diane McIver had a will already in existence?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what is your best recollection about the time frame under which Diane McIver would have requested Mr. Rickard to assist her in making changes to her will?
It was 2007.
2007. Would that have been before or after the birth of Austin Swall? If you know.
I'm not certain. I think it was after his birth. I'm not sure.
And if this was in 2007, when do you believe Austin Swall's year of birth was?
I think he's 11. So it may have been 2007.
So that would have been right when he was born.
Yes.
Now, were you aware of, let's strike that, let me ask you a better question. How would you describe Diane McIver's interactions and feelings for Austin Swall?
She was like a mother to him. He was her child.
Would she bring him to the corporate offices?
Yes. We had live baby screens during meetings.
Okay. You said live baby screens?
Yes, live.
Okay. She would actually bring him when he was just a little baby?
Yes. We had a baby bed, a playpen. Yes.
Okay. So that would have been around the time that she was talking to Mr. Rickard or making requests of him to make changes to her will?
I think so, yes.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, as young Austin began to grow and develop, would he still be brought to the office by Ms. McIver?
Yes, he had a job.
He had a job. Okay. All the way up until really the date of her death?
Yes.
Now, can you tell the jurors, after 2007, did you participate in any attempts to change Ms. McIver's will after this 2007 request?
No, I did not.
Can you tell the jurors whether or not first of all, in simple terms, what is a codicil?
Codicil is like an amendment to your will.
Okay. And who actually
drafted the codicil, prepared it?
I would object if we're getting into the codicil that
2007. I would object to the relevance of that.
What's the relevance as to who, we may have already heard who drafted it from an earlier answer, but what's the relevance to something from 11 years ago?
First, I didn't think that we had established who drafted it, but it's going to show that Ms. McIver often did personal business with Mr. Rickard.
Okay.
Mr. Rickard would have been in a position to...
I'll let you repeat the question you just asked. We're not getting into whatever the content was.
Okay.
No, I'm asking that.
No.
Okay. All right. Then you may repeat your question or something close to it.
Okay. Who drafted the codicil in 2007?
Attorney Ken Rickard instructed me to draft it.
And welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. You were just listening to somebody who worked with Diane McIver, who had discussed going over her will with her. It was never finalized. She wanted to make an amendment to it. Also discussing her relationship with her godson, who apparently she treated like her grandson. It was the light of her life and really brought her a lot of joy. I want to welcome back in Mark Eiglarsh, a criminal defense attorney out of Florida. Mark, don't you need probable cause to investigate and bring charges in the first place? How are you gleaning that from this circumstance? Outside of the fact that he shot her from behind, right? But he's not denying that. And he's saying it's an accident. So how are you making the leap to intentional murder? What is supporting that besides this financial motive, which is totally speculative?
I'm not making that leap. The jurors have to put together everything and see if that gets to intentional murder.
But couldn't you just bring a murder charge anytime there's an accident by the very nature of somebody getting killed? Don't you need more than that?
Easy, defense lawyer, easy. There's more than that here. It's a question of whether they want to put it all together. You heard your last guest talk about how anybody who has ever gone through a gun safety course doesn't hold their finger on a gun. And so for those people, they think it's more likely that it's intentional. You add to that the financial motive. You look at some of the other pieces of the puzzle, and it's possible that they get a conviction. I'm not saying it's likely. It is challenging. The best defense, whenever I defend someone, the best defense is to embrace as many facts as you possibly can. And then there's only a teeny bit of difference. And that's what you've got here.
So my question to you then, just to play devil's advocate, is, isn't there always a financial motive? Even if you don't have a life insurance policy, if you have a spouse that's making a lot of money, you could always say the other spouse wants it all to themselves. There's always going to be some type of inheritance with people who are middle to upper class.
You can make that argument. Here, it was dramatic, though. The prosecution's theory and opening statement was his life was spiraling out of control. He was no longer a partner. His net worth was minus $5,000. That's very different from, what it used to be, and different from the average case where somebody's not in the hole and they used to enjoy a different financial lifestyle, and that he had everything to gain by her dying, to the point that he would then immediately get $7 million. I think 7 million reasons right there is something that will be persuasive to jurors. Not necessarily carry the day, but
one for each dollar. Just to your point about him being a gun user, a gun aficionado, and claiming that the gun went off by accident, possibly not being believable. There's this debate over whether the gun was cocked, and the argument is that if it was cocked, it would take about 2 pounds of force versus if it was not cocked, 12 pounds of force. Yeah, and then you've also got the argument, Mark, that he had a sleep disorder. And so the theory for the defense is that he suddenly jerked out of his sleep. He was scared he was in a bad area, and that's when he accidentally pulled the trigger. Is that a strong defense given the fact that he has experience with guns?
Okay, it makes him negligent beyond all doubt as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's not reasonable, first of all, to think that he's going to cock the gun inside the vehicle because he has concerns about the neighborhood that they're in. He didn't say that there was anybody banging on the window, so that's suspect. But here's the biggest problem, Amy. If they believe the driver, the victim's, the decedent's best friend, and then he's screwed because his theory was they hit some kind of bump and then the gun kind of went off, which is great if you're designing this defense. But she's saying they were at a red light.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, it's undoubted that her testimony is going to be critical because she's an eyewitness.
Yes, and or an ear witness. She heard things. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough case. This is not an easy one.
So what's
You know?
your overall feeling, Mark? Do you think he'll be convicted?
No.
Do you think he'll be convicted on the murder charge? If not, do you think he'll be convicted on a lesser charge?
He should be convicted on the lesser charge. He was grossly negligent, and he's responsible for her tragic demise. Absolutely, what he did was, I think, a criminal act. Is it intentional? No, I think it'll probably fall short of that. I think the jurors, either to compromise or because they're just not convinced beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, I think they'll hang their hat on the lesser, which will punish this, 70-some-odd-year-old man sufficiently.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Mark. I appreciate it, as always. Have a good rest of the day.
Take care. You too.
All right, now we want to toss to a clip of some people who worked with Diane explaining what happened in the days before she was killed by her husband. He says that it was an accident in the car, but some people are saying that he, in an unusual move, entered her office and he was beet red and walking swiftly past the receptionist, didn't say a word, seemed angry. Is this significant? Take a listen to what they said happened in the days before she was killed.